Hi folks, lovely to be here with all of you today. Thank you for the introduction, Natasha. So for those of you I have not had the pleasure of meeting yet, my name is Martin Mason and I am the co-founder of an organisation called Talent Mapper. But before that, I used to work in-house for around 15 years leading talent teams, diversity and inclusion teams and learning teams. And I kept coming up against the same challenges and problems in all the organisations I was in. I have a deep-rooted passion to try and tackle systemic inequality in organisations, and as it's Pride Month, it kind of feels fitting to, live my authentic self. So I am an openly gay man. That's something I can say now as an adult. It's not something I would have been kind of comfortable or felt safe to say, certainly growing up in my career much earlier on. And that's one of the things that really drives me around D&I and why it's such a passion area for me, in that I saw so many incredible, talented people in the organisations I used to work in that used to get overlooked often because of their characteristics. And so on a personal mission to try and tackle that through the work that we do. So I'm delighted to talk to you today about how you, in your organisations, can put in inclusive recruitment and inclusive talent strategies that will really help to systemically change the organisations you work in and make the workforce a more equitable place for everyone. So behind this, there is a really compelling business case. Now, I have worked with many boards over the last few years, and the thing that there's often different things that each board member will care about. I know you will resonate with this, and it depends on what their levers are, but finding that lever that you can use to pull is one of the best mechanisms to get the change in your organisations. Often, not always, but often, a lot of FDs are particularly interested in the financial return. If we're making any investment in D&I, they want to know what's that going to do for our bottom line in the business. So what we typically see through all the work that we've done over the last few years and our research, and this is underpinned by quite a lot of research around McKinsey, Boston Consulting Group, and if ever you want the references or research papers on these, come and see us at the stand and I can happily share the kind of research behind this with you. But what we found is that businesses that have a more diverse and equitable workforce on average see a 56% higher operating result performance consistently. They see a 53% return on equity. So for those that are publicly listed, FTSE businesses, for example, or on the NASDAQ, you will start to see much higher returns on equity for investment made in this space. And on top of that, for those of you that are concerned with things like EBIT, that's a 14% higher return on your financial performance as an organisation. So these are not, pie-in-the-sky numbers. This is actual reality of businesses that have implemented this. And there is a lot of science behind this in terms of how you get to those numbers and what truly drives it. And innovation is one of the key drivers in achieving this. And you can't do that without different points of view, different thoughts, different schools of thought around the table to achieve it. So to kind of bring this home and into kind of reality for you, a lot of you will work in and around the talent acquisition space. So I thought we'd try and make this a bit practical today. On your tables, you will notice there is a handout that looks a little bit like this. For some of you, it's in the middle of the table. And we've pulled together a bit of a scenario to help you start to think about what this could look like in your organisations at a pragmatic level. So I would invite you, we've not got too long on this, but just in the interest of time, if you can take a minute or two just to scan through that document, I would love to hear from anybody if they can identify any of the areas of bias in this recruitment process. Okay, has anybody found anything in the top couple of paragraphs that kind of stands out for them as a potential bias that they wouldn't mind sharing?
Focus on a certain university.
So the focus on a certain university, why might that be a bias in the process?
You are not your education. You are so much more. You're a whole human being.
Exactly that, yeah. So this is a common misconception that we get a lot of the time. So I can't even count how many workshops I've done with boards over the last 4 or 5 years. And one of the major challenges I get back is, yes, Martin, we want equity, diversity and inclusion, but we don't want to give up on hiring the best grads with a 2-1 from a certain university. And when I start to unpick that and start almost being the inquisitive child and asking the question, but why? What is the goal you're trying to get to? Interestingly, it's not something that our senior leaders often get asked. And I've been there, I've worked at that level within an organisation and we've got lots of things going on. We're desperately trying to spin many plates and often we'll take a brief from somebody, they're like, I want X, we go and do it. But when you stop and go, okay, could you talk to me about what is it you're trying to get to? What would success look like? What would the best candidate do for you in that role? You start to download a set of skills or capabilities out of them in terms of the output that they're looking for. When you then start to go, okay, but how does a university degree achieve that? Look at them and see how perplexed they are. Because often there isn't a correlation, but it's habitual. It's what we've been conditioned to expect. We want people from a certain academic institution with a certain set of criteria because it's become a benchmark of excellence. But is it a predictor of performance? Is it helping them to achieve the goals that they've set? Question mark. So this isn't to be disparaging around degrees. I do have one. It took me a long time to get it, but I did get one. And I retrained in mine because what I ended up doing at university was nothing to do with what I do now. And interestingly, I get asked way more about my law degree than any of the credentials that I've got in D&I and HR. And that was always a really interesting thing for me because it's like, well, I'm not a practicing lawyer. It doesn't matter what I got in my law degree. What you should be concerned with is what I do now and my skills and capability. But this is where the disconnect starts to come in that process. Anything else that anyone spotted apart from university?
Yeah. Let me give you.
Oh,
Hello.
How are you? Okay.
I'm all right. How are you?
Yeah, Nisha asked for flexibility. I think it was advertised on the advert or the job role, and they're holding it against her essentially when making a decision.
Yeah, so interesting around that. So you're absolutely right. That is another area of bias around the flexibility. We make a lot of assumptions around candidates and what they can and can't do based on the information that they share with us. And without kind of more objective facts or challenge in that process, the more and more subjectivity we get into that process, we know the less likely the output will be in terms of diversity, equity and inclusion. So starting to put steps in this process to eradicate that is one of the critical things to make systemic change around your processes. There are 7 different forms of bias in this scenario. Just in the interest of time, I'm not going to go through them all, but if you do want the kind of full debrief on this, do come and see us, and I'm happy to kind of share the activity if this is something that you want to run in-house. Also, we know that there is a lot of bias around identity, names and demographic. So, interestingly, this same individual applied for roles in lots of different organisations, and this was a study that was done by the BBC that they found. How much of an impact do you think when we start to change that there was in terms of drop-off rate in the process between Sandra here on the left and Miriam on the right? Any ballpark guess?
90%.
90, yeah, you're not far off. So in terms of the callback rate, 19% on this side, 4% on this side, just by putting the image or changing the name on the CV. Exactly the same CV and profile. So it just shows you how inherently biased our recruitment processes are. The other step within this is the actual recruitment process itself. So one of the things that organisations like Unleashed do is they will look at your process like this and deconstruct it and start to identify bias gaps in your process. They've done this, and I've seen this done with numerous different organisations, and on average there are between 9 and 13 steps from going out to market and bringing the candidate in. And more often than not, 80% of those have got inherent bias baked into the process. And unless you start to get objectivity into this process, you're never going to systemically fix D&I in the organisation. So starting to deconstruct your process and see where some of the bias might creep in, using examples like this, will really help you to start to tighten that. We've pulled together a fact sheet for you as well that kind of explains a bit more about bias. I'm going to move through this quickly, but we have got some USB pens with all of the resources from today on our stand, at the Talent Mapper stand. If you come and see us, I can give those to you so you can take those and use them. But there's some really good material on there that kind of explains some more about the science of bias and where it exists in the process. But we know that kind of the 4 broad categories for that are too much information in the process. Actually, information isn't always helpful in making decisions, too much of it. Not enough kind of meaning given to the criteria, so it tends to be very subjective. What do we think about the individual as opposed to hard and fast criteria around the selection? The need to act fast, so filling those vacancies quickly rather than taking our time and making sure we've got the right person for the job. And in terms of what we should remember through that process, the important bit being kind of the skills and capabilities of the individual, not their kind of background or profile. The other thing is to make sure that your process is inclusive by default. So starting to think about it from a perspective of accessibility and neurodiversity is also a really good starting point. We've seen lots of processes where it's actually very difficult to get through the application process if you've got any form of neurodiversity. And there are some really good tools that you can use to do that, which I'll talk to you about. The other interesting thing around the interview and recruitment process is it's not kind of a one-size-fits-all model to achieve equity in the process. So there are 3 things that we really want to understand in that process, and we need solid criteria around each of these in order to make it effective. So assessing for competency, how well can somebody do that job? The values, do they passionately believe in the organisation and what you as a company stand for? Very distinct difference between this and culture fit. It's not what we're looking for. Culture fit actually is proven to be a metric that goes against D&I. You want culture add. You want people who are going to bring something to the party, add something different as an additive rather than fitting in with the organisation. And their technical capability, depending on the role. We need to, if we've got somebody working in marketing and they're going to create images, of course, they're going to need to know how to use certain tools like Canva or Photoshop, whatever it might be. But this is what we should be assessing for. And interestingly, when you work back through the recruitment process, we see this a lot, that it doesn't actually measure the output desired in terms of whether someone can actually do the job. One of the best levers to pull to achieve this is skills-based hiring. Who here is familiar with skills-based hiring? Quick show of hands. Okay, about half of you, I would say. So for those of you that are less familiar, skills-based hiring is effectively a talent strategy that helps to prioritise the candidate's capabilities in the process. So it doesn't detract from their academic attainments, but it focuses primarily on can they do the thing that you need them to do in the role, and making sure that your process is engineered towards assessing for that. I've heard lots of debate recently about the difference between things like competencies, skills, behaviours, etc. Fundamentally, we do need people to have a certain set of behaviours. They need to behave, in a civilised way at work. But we also need them to be technically competent at what they do. And that's the bit that we often don't assess particularly well in the recruitment process with a standard competency-based interview. So getting someone to demonstrate what they can do and being more creative around that is a really good way to achieve it. Steps for establishing skills. So keep it really simple. Sit down with hiring managers and ask them to describe what would the perfect person in this job look like. And from that, you'll start to glean a set of criteria. That criteria should be the basis for your assessment. And the best way to do that is to then split that broadly into 2 camps. So you want to be able to interview through an interview process to screen out certain behaviours, and then we want some sort of assessment to test their technical capability with fixed scoring and detailed notes around what each of the scores are. So if we're scoring on a scale of 1 to 5, what is a 1, what is a 2, 3, 4 and 5 before you go into that process? When you do that and you follow that and you independently score, you will see transformative results in terms of the profile coming through for D&I. One of our customers that we worked with on this was Dunelm. They had a very diverse workforce across the UK, but not at mid to senior level. So a couple of years ago, they found it really difficult to get good spread of diversity to mid to senior level roles. And when we started to unpick their process and we stripped it out and we went through the steps that I've just talked to you about and started to correct that, we saw a dramatic uplift in people getting promoted to mid to senior level roles. So it really does make a substantive difference if you get this stuff right. For those of you trying to assess skills, if you are struggling when taking that candidate brief, there are some hacks that you can use. So one is to use like a skills card almost, so to come to your managers with a preset list of skills around that job. So whack it into ChatGPT, it will spit out a load of skills for you. You can use that as a list to then say which of these are the most important to you, rank them. You can also transcribe the conversation, if for those of you that are feeling a bit more tech savvy, from the hiring managers, whack that into ChatGPT and ask it to pull out a summary. It will pull out a skills list from that and tell you what are the top 10 skills for that role. That can be the basis for your recruitment as well. But if you want one that's already kind of done for you, then feel free to come and chat to me and the team, because our technology will help to assist around that. And has got kind of like the pre-built skills matrix in there to help do it, to make it a bit easier. As I mentioned, scoring interviews. Make sure that before you go in, you've got your questions there and you've detailed out what good looks like around each of those. I promise you it's one of the most transformative things you can do in terms of fairness and equity in this process. If you want anything that's kind of automated that will help you do this, that's done for you, chat to people like Equitas or I want to say Metavite. Have I got that right, Natasha? Yeah, thank you. Folks like that have got technology tools that can help you with this type of stuff to automate that process as well to make it a bit easier. As I mentioned, in terms of the process itself, start by sifting based on what the skills criteria is that you need, then move to interview and decide which elements you're going to look at in interview, and then finally end with some sort of skills assessment that will be tailored to the role that you're looking at. Other great tools that you can use out there that will help you, there are things like gender decoding tools. Scan your job descriptions or job ads through there. You'll be amazed at what it spits out in terms of results. There's free ones like the Total Job ones. There are paid ones like Textio and others. I can't remember all of them, but there are multiple tools available to you on the market, a bit like the BBC. You've also got accessibility tools such as Recite Me for plugins to help with your process to make sure that it is accessible for folk with dyslexia, dyspraxia, etc. It will act as a screen reader and change it. Also for people with visual or audio impairments, it will help in terms of converting text to speech in your process as well. Social advertising, getting the widest possible reach. You've got companies like Adway that can help you with that. They will help you start to find a more wider demographic pool to attract and think about the key messaging in terms of attracting candidates into the process. And then in terms of helping you with SEO, people like Optimal are very good for that. So making sure that, you get a wide reach of people. There are multiple vendors. These are just people that we know in this space, as a caveat and health warning. And then in terms of things like your employer brand, making sure that you're not making any faux pas with your messaging, your PR. The Wiser crew are particularly good at that. Job ads, making sure that they are accessible, consistent and accurate. The more information you can put in there and following that process we've talked about, you're setting yourself up for success in terms of getting folk through the process. And then moving on to talent management, once you've got folk in the business, the next barrier that we see is getting people on and through the organisation in terms of mobility. And this is where the most inherent bias sits within organisations. And this is where we've got a speciality in our team at helping to fix this process. Traditional processes, we know, so things like succession planning, great example. It's often a board sat around with the head of talent in a room deciding on the fates of many. So we need a new CFO, we need a new marketing director, we need a new head of sales. Who do we know in the organisation that can do that? And even just through having it in that conversational format makes it subjective. And it will be who is in proximity to us in terms of who gets suggested for those roles. There's also very little assessment done in my experience, having looked at this with almost 80 organisations now over the last 4 years around potential, so assessing what someone can do. The bias in the process I've mentioned, highly subjective, and the time and focus tends to be on categorising people into boxes as opposed to thinking about who have we got that could do role X. And that's where we wanted to kind of break and fix the system. So we see that the future is more going to be focused on skills and capability. What can people do? What is their aspiration? What do they want to do? And their availability. What availability do they have to get involved in projects, in development activity, in new roles? When you get these three things right and you focus your talent conversations on these, it starts to get the ball rolling and you start to see a very different profile at mid to senior level in the organisation. And to achieve this, you need a system that is transparent. The best way you can do that, in my experience, is with technology to make sure that all role information, career paths, opportunities and projects are democratised and available to everybody. And you're signposting clearly how they can take that career journey. How do they get through the steps to make sure that they are the most successful people to get to that role? We had a customer recently who managed to move somebody internally from a specialist role. Traditionally, it's something they would have gone externally for, and it was a woman in the organisation. I know from my research that women tend to be less self-promoting and will wait until they've ticked every criteria before they put themselves forward for a role. With the use of technology, they were able to be identified as a perfect match for a role. They put themselves forward. Lo and behold, they got the role, had a massive bump, have been moved up into a senior position, and it was a win-win for everybody because it saved money on having to go external, but also it's given somebody who would have been traditionally overlooked a great development opportunity. And we want to do that en masse for people to really help with people's careers. Make sure it's output focused and also data-driven decisions to make sure you've got the right selection around this. Any questions, folks?
Martin, thank you very much. Can we give Martin a big round of applause first and foremost?